It all began even before the first cry. Before Samuel took his first breath, his story was already being written, not in stone, but in tears. There was Hannah, a woman who cried more than she smiled. Her empty womb hurt more than any wound, and God's silence seemed like a cruel answer. Year after year, she went up to Shiloh with her husband and humiliation in her heart. Peninnah, the other wife, made a point of reminding Hannah that she had no children. But on that day, something changed. Hannah entered the temple, and with her eyes red from crying, she poured out her soul before God. It was not a beautiful prayer. It was a raw, unfiltered outpouring. She promised, "If you give me a son, I will give him to you for all the days of his life." And then she left without a visible answer, but with a lighter heart. Months later, a boy was born. He wasn't just Anna's son, he was the fulfillment of a promise. They named him Samuel, which means God has heard. From his first breath, there was something different about that boy. It wasn't just the sparkle in his eyes or the way he listened attentively. It was as if he already knew that he didn't belong only to his mother, but to a much greater purpose. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. If this content touches your heart and you want to support us, feel free to click on the Thanks a Lot button. All help is welcome and makes a big difference. When Samuel was still nursing, Hannah began to prepare for separation. Weaning came early, but not because of a lack of love. She took him to Shiloh, the same place where she had asked for him, and gave him to the priest Eli, so that he might serve the Lord every day of his life. Giving him up was not easy, but Hannah knew that boy had been born with a mission. Ramah was a small town, half forgotten on the map, one of those places where time moves slowly and everyone knows everyone else. It was there that Samuel opened his eyes for the first time. Amid the smell of damp earth and the distant sound of animals in the fields, that baby arrived, bringing peace to Hannah's home. She looked at him as if she were holding her own miracle in her arms, and indeed, that was exactly what it was. Samuel was the cry answered, the prayer answered, God's gift wrapped in flesh and bones. The boy grew up quickly, as if he were in a hurry to fulfill his purpose. He wasn't the kind of child who threw tantrums or ran away from his chores. On the contrary, he had a quiet but firm manner, as if he could hear something that others could not. When he ran through the fields, it was as if the winds themselves recognized him. When he helped his mother, it was with a maturity that did not match his age. There was a strange gleam in his eyes, not the gleam of someone seeking attention, but of someone who was born with a calling. From an early age, Anna knew that his days at home were numbered. Every night, as she covered him with his blanket, she remembered the promise. Her heart ached, but she did not waver. She sewed him a new tunic every year, as if each stitch were a hidden prayer. When the day came, she took him to the temple herself and handed him over to the priest Eli, and that was when everything began to change. The boy, who was born in a small town, ended up in a place where the sky seemed closer to the earth. The Temple of Shiloh was full of symbols, smells, and silence, the heavy curtains, the altars smelling of sacrifice, the ancient chants. Everything there pointed to something greater. And it was in this environment, full of mystery and divine presence, that Samuel began to learn what it meant to serve, even without yet understanding who, in fact, was calling his name in the dark, early mornings. The Temple of Shiloh was more than a place of rituals. It was a world apart, and Samuel, still a boy, lived in that world as if he were an apprentice in a sacred palace. The day began early, with the first rays of sunlight touching the stones of the courtyard. The smell of incense mingled with the sound of Eli's footsteps, the old and weary priest who now carried Samuel like a late son, even without saying it out loud. Eli's eyes were weakened by time, but he could still see what mattered. He saw in Samuel a strange calmness, a rare attentiveness. The boy followed him everywhere, picking up instructions in the air, carefully cleaning the sacred objects, and standing still when Eli told stories of Moses, of the Ark of the Covenant, of the days when God spoke to men as one speaks to a friend. Samuel listened to everything with an open heart, absorbing it like dry earth absorbs the first rain. But the temple also had its shadows. Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, mocked the sacred things. They took what belonged to God for themselves, laughed behind their father's back, and lived as if they were untouchable. Samuel saw everything, but he did not get involved. He was like a small flame trying to shine in a place full of smoke. Even without understanding why, he remained steadfast, guided by something greater than himself. At night, when silence reigned and only the distant crackling of the fire could be heard, Samuel slept near the ark. It wasn't just any place. It was the place where God dwelt, and it was on one of those nights, when the world was asleep and the lamps barely lit the temple, that Samuel heard his name being called. A voice, clear, direct, like a whispering thunder. He thought it was Eli, but it wasn't. It was late at night and everything was quiet. The light from the lamps danced faintly, casting long shadows across the walls of the temple. Samuel was already lying down, his eyes almost closed, when he heard it. "Samuel!" The voice came firm, alive, as if someone were right there, calling him urgently. He jumped up, still a little dazed, and ran to Eli. "Here I am. Did you call me?" he asked breathlessly. Eli, half asleep, frowned. "I didn't call you, my son. Go back to bed." Samuel obeyed, not understanding. Maybe he had dreamed it, but he had barely settled down again when... "Samuel!" There it was again. Now he was quicker, running to Eli with wide eyes. Again, Eli shook his head. He sent him back. The third time, something changed. The old priest, tired but experienced, realized that something was different. It wasn't his imagination. It was the kind of call he himself hadn't heard in a long time. With a low voice and a heavy heart, Eli said, "If I call you again, answer, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" And that's what happened. Samuel lay down again, now wide awake. His heart was pounding. Minutes later, the voice came again. Only this time, it wasn't just a voice. It was as if the air had changed, as if God's very presence had filled the room. "Samuel! Samuel!" And the boy answered as Eli had taught him, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." At that moment, heaven touched earth. God spoke to Samuel, not with riddles or blurred visions, but with clear words. He gave him a heavy message, a revelation about the future of Eli and his house. It was something for grown-ups. But God trusted the boy, and that changed everything. Over time, Samuel's voice began to spread, first among the priests, then among the tribes. The boy who served in the temple became a man, and the man became a judge. He wasn't a judge in a robe or in a courtroom. He was the kind of judge who listened to God and guided the people with wisdom, and the people needed it. Israel was in chaos. Everyone did what they wanted, and no one remembered God's laws very well. It was like a cart without brakes going down a hill. Samuel, on the other hand, walked upright. He went from town to town, listening to cases, settling disputes, counseling families. His name commanded respect, not because of the tone of his voice or the way he walked, but because of what he carried inside. He had authority without shouting, firmness without hitting, and when he spoke, even the wind seemed to listen. But times of peace were always short in Israel. A new danger was approaching, the Philistines, a warlike people armed and angry. They came like a wave trying to swallow Israel once again. The people panicked. They cried out, ran, and begged for help. And Samuel, with the calmness of one who already knew where to look, gathered the people at Mizpah. There, he led a great meeting. It was not just a war council. It was a call to repentance. He told everyone to throw away their idols fast and seek God in truth. It was like cleaning the eyes of a blind man. For the first time in a long time, the people could see again, When the Philistines arrived with their cries and spears, the heavens responded before the swords. God thundered from above and scattered the enemies like leaves in the wind. Israel won without really understanding how. After the victory at Mizpah, it seemed as if Israel had awakened from a long sleep. The people were more united. Their hearts were turned to God again, and Samuel continued as judge, traveling through the cities, teaching, correcting, reminding them what it meant to live with a clean heart. Wherever he went, he left a trail of justice. He brought peace to families, counsel to leaders, and direction to the tribes. He was like a constant flame in the midst of darkness. But even with the Philistines retreating, the challenges continued. Israel was still a divided territory, without a king, without an organized army, and surrounded by enemies. It was like a flock without a fence, living between promises and dangers. Samuel knew this. He knew that winning a battle was not enough. The people needed to stand firm, or everything would fall apart again. So he did something symbolic. He took a stone and placed it between Mizpah and Shen, at the place of victory. He called that stone Ebenezer, which means, "Thus far has the Lord helped us." It wasn't just a monument. It was a reminder, a milestone of faith, a sign that victory had not come by force or numbers, but by dependence. Even so, the people were still unstable. All it took was a drought, a threat, a rumor, and there they were, afraid again, looking for a quick way out. That's when they started to compare themselves to others. They looked at other peoples, saw kings with crowns and horses, and began to think, why can't we have one too? Samuel sensed the mood changing. They no longer listened to him with the same respect. It was no longer enough to have God as their king. Now they wanted someone of flesh and blood to rule them. And while Samuel tried to understand this thirst for something that seemed so contrary to what God had done up to that point, a new pressure began to build, as strong as a storm approaching in the distance. One day, the elders of Israel gathered together and went to Ramah, where Samuel lived. They arrived with serious faces without beating around the bush and said what had been growing behind the scenes for a long time. "You are old, Samuel, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Give us, therefore, a king like all the other nations." It hit him like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just a rejection of his work, it was a direct rejection of God. It was as if everything they had lived through up to that point had been forgotten in the blink of an eye. Samuel listened in silence. His grey beard could not hide the discomfort in his eyes. He had always been the type to bear the weight of other people's decisions, but this time, it hurt differently. Even so, as he always did, he brought the matter before God. And God, with the firmness of one who knows the human heart like the palm of his hand, replied, "Listen to the voice of the people. They have not rejected you, but me, that I should not reign over them." So Samuel returned to the people with a warning, and it was not an encouraging speech. He spoke of the consequences. If you have a king, he will take your sons to fight in his wars, your daughters to serve in his palace, your lands, your herds, and you will become his servants. It was as if Samuel was trying to show them the thorn behind the crown, but no one wanted to know. They had made up their minds. They wanted a king. They wanted to be like other nations. And so it was, with a heavy heart, that Samuel accepted the new path that was opening up before him. Even though he didn't agree, even though it hurt, he knew that his role was to obey. But God already had someone in mind, a tall, striking man from the tribe of Benjamin, someone who, in human eyes, seemed to be everything Israel wanted. His name was Saul, son of Kish from the tribe of Benjamin. Tall, handsome, imposing, the kind of man who made others stop and stare when he walked by. But he didn't think he was special. On the contrary, he was humble, quiet, even overly suspicious. And it was while searching for his father's lost donkeys that he crossed paths with Samuel. Sounds simple, right? A man looking for donkeys. But there was something bigger at work there, a scene that on the outside seemed ordinary, but on the inside was full of purpose. When Samuel saw Saul, God whispered, "He is the one. This is the man who will reign over my people." Samuel approached him with his usual firm and calm manner. He invited Saul to eat with him, treated him with honor, and the next day when they were alone, he took a bottle of oil, poured it on Saul's head, and anointed him king. There, in that silent moment between two men, began the reign that Israel had so longed for. Saul was in shock. He didn't know how to deal with it. Me, of all people, from the smallest tribe in Israel. But the oil had already been poured. The anointing had already been done. And when the people were gathered, Samuel presented the new king. In the middle of the crowd, Saul hid behind the luggage, literally shy, scared, a king who didn't want the spotlight. But God brought him into view, and the people shouted with joy, "Long live the king!" In the early days, Saul pleased everyone. He led battles, defeated enemies, and protected the tribes. Samuel, out of respect and obedience, continued to guide him. But deep down, something was bothering him. Saul was strong with the sword, but weak in obedience. He heard, but he didn't listen. And it was in one of those impulsive decisions, in a battle marked by pride, that he crossed a line that could no longer be undone. Saul's downfall did not happen overnight. It was slow, like a crack that starts small and spreads. First, he disobeyed a clear order. He was supposed to wait for Samuel to offer the sacrifice before the war, but anxious, he took the lead and did it his way. When Samuel arrived, the smell of fire still lingered in the air. Saul's face showed that he knew he had messed up, but he tried to hide it. "I did it out of fear. The people were scattering." Samuel listened, but he already knew. Something had been broken. "Your reign will not last," he said. And the silence between the two weighed more than 1,000 swords. Then came another mission. God commanded Saul to completely destroy the Amalekites, sparing nothing. But again, Saul did it his way. He spared the enemy king and kept the best of the flock. When Samuel confronted him, Saul tried to justify himself. "I kept them to sacrifice to the Lord." But God did not want sacrifice. He wanted obedience. That was when Samuel said the words that echo to this day, "Obedience is better than sacrifice." This time, there was no turning back. God rejected Saul as king. Samuel, heartbroken, turned his back and walked away. He never spoke another word to Saul. And even though it was hard, he knew it was necessary. But the heart of a prophet is not made of stone. Samuel wept. He wept for days. He cried for all that Saul could have been. He cried because he saw the people once again in danger. He cried because he carried the weight of decisions that were not his. And it was in this valley of sorrow that God spoke again. "How long will you grieve over Saul? Get up, go to Bethlehem. There, among the sons of Jesse, I have chosen a new king." Samuel got up with a heavy heart, but his eyes fixed ahead. Samuel arrived in Bethlehem with slow but steady steps. The people were frightened. It was rare to see the prophet there, and when he appeared, it was because something serious was about to happen. He said he came in peace and asked Jesse and his sons to prepare for a sacrifice. One by one, the boys were presented. The first was tall, strong, with the face of a warrior. Samuel thought, "This is the one." But God whispered in his heart, "Don't look at appearances. I see what's inside." And so it went, 1, 2, 3, until 7 sons had been presented. Nothing. Samuel scratched his beard and asked, "Are there no more boys?" Jesse hesitated. "There is the youngest. He is tending the sheep." They called the boy. And when David entered, dirty from the fields, with his hair tousled and his face red from the sun, God said, "He is the one." Samuel, without hesitation, took the horn of oil and anointed David right there in front of his brothers. No one understood. But something changed in that moment. The Spirit of God came upon the boy. A new cycle was beginning, silent but powerful. Samuel was no longer young. The weight of the years was in his hands and eyes. He had seen kings rise and fall, tribes lost and found again. But he never stopped hearing the voice that had called him that early morning so many years ago. He continued to guide David behind the scenes, watching from afar as the new chosen one took his first steps. He no longer traveled to all the cities as he had before, but his voice was still heard. And when his time came, Samuel departed quietly. He was buried in Ramah, the city where it all began. The earth covered him, but his legacy remained like scattered seeds. Because his story does not end in the grave. It lives on in the choices he made, the words he spoke, the kings he anointed, and everything God accomplished through his faithfulness. Samuel's story is not one of personal glory, palaces, or triumphant endings. It is the story of someone who knew how to listen when no one else was listening, who spoke when he needed to, who remained silent when it hurt, and who stood firm even when the world around him was changing course. He did not seek the spotlight. He did not want to be a hero. He just wanted to obey. From the womb, his life was an answer to prayer. He grew up amid the mistakes of others, but chose a different path. He did not become corrupt. He did not sell himself. He did not stray from God, even when the people he loved decided to follow another path. Samuel learned early on that obedience was not always easy, that serving was tiring, and that often God's will went against the applause. But still, he obeyed. We learn from him that God's call does not come with a manual. It comes in the middle of the night, with a voice that seems confusing at first, but becomes clearer over time. That serving God is not about positions or titles, but about faithfulness in the details. That listening is more powerful than speaking, that a heart sensitive to God can change the course of a nation. Samuel also teaches us that not all of God's plans are comfortable. Sometimes it means being rejected. Other times it means anointing someone knowing that you will not see the end of that story. It means planting without reaping, preparing the way for others to walk. And even so, it's worth it, because in the end, Samuel was not remembered as the man who had power, but as the man God used. And that, at the end of the day, is all that matters. May we learn to listen like him, to obey like him, and to trust, even when everything seems silent. If you liked Samuel's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming adversity, be sure to like this video and share it with your loved ones. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, we will explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.